Cale Renner leaned back in his cockpit, the hum of his aging cargo freighter a comforting rhythm in the silence of space. He wasn't supposed to take passengers, too risky for a man trying to stay off the radar. But Mera had been different. The girl was young, maybe 18, with a sharp wit and a defiant streak that reminded him of himself in his reckless youth. She was supposed to be a simple drop-off, a favour for an old friend. No complications, no trouble. But trouble found them anyway. The moment his ship dropped out of hyperspace near the trade hub, a sleek, predatory vessel appeared out of nowhere. Its dark hull seemed to absorb the light of the nearby stars, and before Cale could react, it latched onto his ship like a predator sinking its claws into prey. The alarm screamed as the enemy vessel forced its way into his freighter. Cale grabbed his blaster and sprinted toward Mera's cabin, his heart pounding. The girl didn't deserve this. She was just a passenger caught in a galaxy far crueler than she realized. But by the time he reached her, the doors had been blown open, the cabin ransacked. Mera was gone. Cale caught a glimpse of her captors through the shattered viewport, tall insectoid beings with gleaming carapaces and cold, calculating eyes. The Taruk. Known for their brutal interrogations and experiments, they were the last creatures Cale wanted to encounter. "Mera!" he shouted, his voice raw. But the only response was the whine of their ship's engines as it detached from his freighter, vanishing into hyperspace before he could even fire a shot. Cale stood there, fists clenched, the weight of failure pressing down on him. He wasn't a hero, wasn't anyone's saviour. He was just a man trying to keep his head down. But now he had a choice to make: turn tail and run, or follow the trail and try to save her. For better or worse, Cale was never good at walking away. Cale stared at the navigational console, his fingers hovering over the controls. The Taruk didn't leave much of a trail, but they'd underestimated him. His years smuggling contraband through hostile space had taught him how to read even the faintest signals. A flicker of distortion in their jump trajectory, a burst of radiation too strong to be background noise. The coordinates led to a desolate asteroid belt in the Zalara sector. Cale knew the stories, an uncharted wasteland where the Taruk operated in secret, their strongholds hidden among the rocks. It was a death sentence for anyone foolish enough to venture there alone. But Cale wasn't thinking about himself. He was thinking about Mera. "All right, kid," he muttered to the empty cabin. "Let's see what I can do." His freighter, the Dust Runner, groaned in protest as he pushed it to its limits. The old ship wasn't built for speed, but Cale coaxed every ounce of power from its engines. As he neared the asteroid field, his scanners lit up with faint energy signatures, shields, patrols, and an unmistakable beacon of concentrated power. A Taruk stronghold. Cale's jaw tightened. Gotcha. The plan was simple: sneak in, find Mera, and get out before the Taruk knew what hit them. But as he navigated the treacherous asteroid belt, the reality of the situation hit him. He was one man against an empire of sadistic alien torturers, armed with nothing but a blaster and an aging freighter held together by luck and duct tape. "Simple," he muttered dryly. "Just another day at the office." As he breached the stronghold's outer defences, the sight of the massive structure looming ahead made his stomach churn. Its jagged towers bristled with alien weaponry, and its walls pulsed with an eerie green glow. Cale docked in a blind spot, slipping into the shadows as he entered the compound. Every step was a gamble, every corner a potential ambush. He didn't have a plan, not really, but he had a purpose. And sometimes that was enough. Cale pressed forward, his thoughts on Mera and the promise he'd silently made the moment she was taken. Whatever it took, he'd bring her back. Or die trying. The halls of the Taruk stronghold were a nightmare of jagged architecture, their walls pulsating with the eerie green glow of alien technology. The air smelled acrid, a mix of burning ozone and something far worse. Cale moved silently, his blaster drawn, his ears straining for any sound over the distant hum of machinery. Every corner he rounded was a gamble, every shadow a potential ambush. Finally, he found her. The torture chamber was massive, its walls lined with alien instruments that seemed to hum with malice. In the centre of the room, Mira hung limp in a glowing, translucent cage suspended above the floor. Her body bore the marks of brutal interrogation: bruises, burns, and cuts. Her breaths were shallow, her head slumped forward. Cale's heart clenched. He had seen horrors in his time, but nothing like this. Taruk guards moved around the chamber, their insectoid bodies clicking as they adjusted controls on the consoles. At the centre of the room stood their leader, a tall figure with shimmering chitin and cruel, multifaceted eyes. Cale stayed in the shadows, his mind racing. The odds were impossible, but he had no choice. As Kali readied himself to move, the Taruk leader stepped forward and spoke in a harsh, grating voice. "The human has no more to give. Dispose of her." "No," Cale whispered, his grip tightening on his blaster. He was too late. A sickly green beam shot from one of the machines, enveloping Mira's body. Her final, strangled scream echoed through the chamber before her head fell forward, lifeless. The guards exchanged cruel, buzzing laughter as they deactivated the cage, letting her body drop to the cold floor. Cale froze, rage and grief warring within him. He couldn't save her. He'd failed. But then something impossible happened. The chamber's lights flickered, the hum of the machines grew erratic, and the Taruk leader tilted his head, his antennae twitching in confusion. Mira's body convulsed. A faint glow began to emanate from her chest, spreading to her limbs as she slowly rose to her feet. Cale's breath caught in his throat. Mira! Her eyes snapped open, glowing with an unearthly light. Her wounds sealed themselves before Cale's eyes, and her body moved with an unnatural grace, as though something inside her had awakened. The Taruk stepped back, their confidence replaced by unease. "I'm not done yet," Mira said, her voice layered with something deeper, something otherworldly. Cale watched in stunned silence as Mira stood, her entire form radiating a faint golden aura. The Taruk leader buzzed a command, and the guards lunged at her. But Mira was faster. Her movements blurred as she twisted and struck, her bare hands tearing through chitinous armor like it was paper. The guards fell one by one, their screams cutting off as she moved with lethal precision. Cale finally snapped out of his shock, stepping out of the shadows to fire at the remaining guards. "Mira!" he called out. But she didn't seem to hear him, her focus entirely on the Taruk leader, who now looked more like prey than predator. "You thought you could break me," Mira said, her voice steady, her glowing eyes fixed on the leader. "But you made a mistake." The Taruk leader backed away, his mandibles clicking in panic. He raised a weapon, a sleek alien staff crackling with energy, and fired. The beam hit Mira squarely in the chest, but instead of harming her, it seemed to feed the glow surrounding her. She took a step forward, her lips curling into a predatory smile. Carla ducked behind a console, taking out another guard with a well-placed shot. "Mira, whatever is going on with you, we need to get out of here." She ignored him, her focus unshaken as she closed the distance to the Taruk leader. He swung his staff in desperation, but she caught it mid-swing, the force of her grip snapping the weapon in two. With one hand, she lifted the leader off the ground, her glowing eyes boring into his. "This is for what you did to me," she said, her voice cold. The Taruk leader made a gurgling sound as Mira's hand glowed brighter, the light spreading to his body. In seconds, he disintegrated into ash, his form collapsing to the floor. The chamber fell silent, the hum of the machines fading as Mira turned toward Cale. He stood cautiously, his blaster still in hand. "Mira, What the hell just happened? She tilted her head, her glowing eyes softening as she looked at him. I don't know, she admitted, her voice quieter now. They triggered something inside me. I think I died. You did, Cale said, his voice heavy. But you came back. And whatever brought you back, it made you into this. Mira looked down at her hands, the golden glow fading as she clenched them into fists. They gave me a weapon, she said, her voice trembling with both fear and determination. Now I'm going to use it. Cale stepped forward, placing a steadying hand on her shoulder. Let's start by getting out of here, together. They moved through the stronghold, leaving destruction in their wake. Cale kept glancing at Mira, still trying to process what she had become. One thing was clear. The Taruk had unleashed something far greater than they could control, and now the galaxy would feel its wrath. The corridors of the Taruk stronghold echoed with alarms, their piercing cries ricocheting off the jagged metallic walls. Cale and Mira moved like shadows, weaving through the chaos left in their wake. Mira's glow had faded, but the sharpness in her gaze and the newfound strength in her every movement spoke volumes. She wasn't the same girl who had been dragged into this place. She was something else now, something unstoppable. Cale fired his blaster at the approaching guards, each shot finding its mark with precision honed over years of smuggling and survival. Beside him, Mira moved with uncanny agility. A guard lunged at her, but she sidestepped with inhuman speed, delivering a strike that shattered the Taruk's armoured exoskeleton with a single blow. The alien crumbled to the floor, its weapon clattering uselessly. "Remind me not to get on your bad side," Cale muttered, glancing at Mira as they pressed forward. Mira didn't respond immediately. Her focus was laser-sharp, her expression unreadable. Finally, she said, "They need to pay for what they've done. Not just to me, but to everyone they've taken." As they reached a fork in the corridor, Cale hesitated. "The hangar's this way," he said, pointing to the left. "We get to the ship. We get out of here." Mira stopped, her jaw tightening. "Not yet," she said, her voice low but firm. "There's a control room deeper in. If I can access their network, I can find out where they're holding the others." Cale frowned, his instincts screaming against the idea of going deeper into enemy territory. "Mira, you've got nothing to prove. Let's just get you out of here." But Mira's gaze was resolute. "I didn't come back just to run, Cale." He sighed, shaking his head. "Fine," he said. "Lead the way." The control room was heavily guarded, but the two of them moved like a force of nature. Cale's blaster shots rang out with deadly precision, while Mira cut through the Taruk like a blade through paper, her strength and speed overwhelming. When they finally breached the room, the surviving guards fled, their courage broken. Mira stepped up to the central console, her hands moving over the alien interface with surprising ease. The screen flickered to life, displaying a grid of cells and their captives. Cale leaned over her shoulder, his expression grim. "There's dozens of them," he said. Mira's fingers froze over the controls. Not for long. The stronghold cells were spread across multiple levels, each one housing terrified prisoners, humans and other alien species alike. Mira and Cale moved quickly, freeing captives as they went. Mira's presence was a beacon of hope, her glowing eyes and unrelenting determination inspiring even the most broken of prisoners to rise and follow. The first group they freed, a mix of humans and aliens, fell in line behind them, their fear giving way to defiance. Cale handed out weapons from the fallen guards, arming the captives for what was to come. "We're not just getting out of here," he said. "We're taking this place." Maya nodded, her expression hard. "They've built their empire on fear and cruelty. It ends today." As they moved to the next cell block, the Tark mounted a counterattack. Waves of guards surged forward, their weapons blazing, but the newly freed captives fought back with a fury born of desperation. Cale shouted orders, keeping the group coordinated, while Ma charged headfirst into the fray. She was a blur of motion, her fists and feet striking with deadly precision. The Tark guards who tried to overwhelm her were thrown back, their weapons shattered and their bodies broken. Her aura flared brighter with every victory, a golden light that seemed to burn away the Tark's resolve. Cale caught up to her as she fought her way through the last line of defence. "You're enjoying this a little too much," he quipped, firing a shot that took down a guard trying to flank her. "They deserve worse," Mia said, her voice cold. She didn't stop moving, her focus entirely on the task at hand. When they reached the final cell block, Maya froze. Inside was a group of children, their wide eyes filled with terror. One of them, a small boy with messy black hair, looked up at her and whispered, "Are you here to save us?" Mia knelt in front of him, her glowing eyes softening. "Yes," she said, her voice firm but kind. "I'm going to get you out of here, all of you." Cale watched as she lifted the boy into her arms, a flicker of the girl he'd first met shining through the unrelenting warrior she'd become. "We've got to move," he said, his voice urgent. "The longer we stay, the more reinforcements they'll send." Mia nodded, leading the children and the rest of the captives toward the hangar. As they moved, the ground beneath them trembled. The Tark had activated a self-destruct sequence, determined to destroy the stronghold rather than let it fall into enemy hands. Cale swore under his breath. "They're trying to bury us." "Let them try," Mia said, her voice steady. "We're not dying here." With Cale's piloting skills and Mia's unrelenting resolve, the group made it to the hangar. The captives loaded onto Cale's freighter as Mia held off the remaining guards, her golden aura lighting up the battlefield. When the last prisoner was safely aboard, she turned and sprinted for the ship, leaping onto the ramp as it lifted off. As they soared into the stars, the stronghold erupted in a blinding explosion, consumed by the destruction the Tark had wrought. Maya stood at the viewport, her glowing eyes reflecting the light of the flames. "It's over," Cale said, stepping beside her. "For now," Mia replied, her voice quiet but resolute. "But this isn't the end." Cale nodded. "No, it's just the beginning." The dust runner hummed steadily as it drifted through the void, carrying its precious cargo of freed prisoners to safety. The freighter, old and battered, was cramped but functional. Cale worked tirelessly at the controls, guiding the ship toward a neutral colony where the captives could find refuge. Behind him, the rescued prisoners huddled together, their faces a mixture of relief and exhaustion. Maya, seated near the viewport, stared silently at the stars. Her glowing eyes had dimmed, but a faint light still lingered within them, a reminder of the power that had awakened inside her. She clenched her fists, her thoughts racing. The faces of the children, the cries of the tortured, and the jeering laughter of the Tark guards played over and over in her mind. Cale approached, breaking her reverie. "We're a few hours out," he said, his voice low. "The colony's expecting us." Mia nodded, not looking away from the viewport. "It's not enough," she murmured. "Freeing these people, it's not enough." Cale sighed, leaning against the bulkhead. "You did more than anyone else would have. You brought them hope." "And what about the others?" Mia snapped, turning to face him. "The ones we couldn't reach? The ones still in chains, suffering while the Tark continue their raids?" Cale met her gaze, his expression grim. "You can't save everyone, Mia." "Maybe not," she said, her voice steady. "But I can fight." "We can fight." Her words hung in the air, heavy with conviction. The other passengers, listening from the shadows, began to stir. One of them, an older woman with scars etched deep into her face, stepped forward. "You're right," the woman said, her voice rough but resolute. "The Tarks have taken too much from too many. If we don't stand up to them, who will?" Mia looked around the room, meeting the eyes of each prisoner. She saw their pain, their anger, their determination. A spark ignited within her. "We'll need more than anger," Kyle said, crossing his arms. "We'll need weapons, allies, and a plan." Mia stood, her presence commanding. "Then let's start building," she said. "This isn't the end of their suffering. It's the beginning of their freedom." The colony was a bustling outpost hidden within the rings of a gas giant, its inhabitants a mix of refugees, traders, and mercenaries. Word of Mia's escape and the destruction of the Tark stronghold spread quickly, drawing attention from every corner of the colony. Cale watched as Mia spoke with the leaders of the settlement, her voice carrying the weight of her conviction. She outlined her plan, not just a rescue operation, but the foundation of a resistance. They would strike at the heart of the Tark Empire, dismantling their operations and freeing their captives, one stronghold at a time. At first, the leaders were skeptical. The Tarks were powerful, their reach vast. But Mia's passion was infectious. She spoke of the horrors she had endured, of the lives saved, and of the strength found in unity. Slowly, the tide began to turn. Cale stood at the edge of the gathering, his arms crossed. "You've got them eating out of your hand," he said when Mia returned to his side. "They're not just following me," Mia said, her expression thoughtful. "They're following a cause, one they've been waiting for." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of preparation. Weapons were scavenged, ships repaired, and alliances forged. Maya trained tirelessly, honing her newfound abilities while inspiring others to rise. Kyle, though reluctant at first, found himself drawn into the effort, using his skills to map enemy territory and strategize their attacks. One evening, as they reviewed their plans, Kyle leaned back in his chair and studied Maya. "You're different," he said. "Not just the glowing eyes or the strength. It's like you've found something bigger than yourself." Maya met his gaze, her expression softening. "When they brought me back, I didn't understand why. I thought it was just for revenge, but now I see it's not about me. It's about all of us. If we don't fight, no one will." Cale nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Guess I'm in it for the long haul then?" Mia returned the smile, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. "Good. I'm going to need you." As the resistance grew, so did the resolve of its leaders. The Tarks, once untouchable, now faced an enemy they couldn't predict, an alliance of the broken and the brave, led by a girl who had died and come back stronger. The galaxy, vast and uncaring, had begun to take notice. And for the first time in years, Cale and Maya felt the stirrings of something they thought they'd lost: hope. The fleet assembled in the shadow of a dying star, its light dim but persistent. Maya stood at the bridge of the flagship, her gaze fixed on the holographic display of their target, a Tark processing facility nestled in the asteroid field of the Orton Belt. It was a fortress, heavily armed and guarded by a small fleet of Tark warships. But to Mia, it was also a symbol, a target that would send a clear message to their oppressors. Cale leaned over the console, his eyes scanning the tactical readout. "This isn't going to be easy," he said, his tone cautious. "They'll be expecting an attack eventually." "That's why we hit them where it hurts first," Maya replied, her voice steady. "They need to know we're not afraid of them." The resistance fleet consisted of a motley assortment of ships, refurbished freighters, retrofitted mining vessels, and a few stolen fighters. It wasn't much compared to the Tark war machine, but it had something the Tarks lacked: desperation, resolve, and leadership that had nothing left to lose. The fleet jumped into the Orton Belt under the cover of its dense asteroid field. As the Tark facility loomed closer, the alarms aboard their ships began to wail. The Tark warships scrambled, their sleek forms bristling with weaponry. "All ships, hold formation," Mia commanded, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Focus fire on their perimeter defences. We're not here to destroy their fleet. We're here to rescue. The battle was fierce. Tark fighters swarmed like locusts, their energy weapons lighting up the darkness. Mia's fleet responded with a mix of ingenuity and sheer audacity. Freighters equipped with magnetic mines disabled the Tark warship shields, while fighters darted through the chaos, drawing enemy fire. Cale piloted a stolen fighter, his hand steady on the controls as he dodged incoming fire. "I thought retirement would be quieter," he muttered, targeting a Tark patrol craft and firing a volley of plasma rounds. The ship exploded in a bright flash, clearing a path for the resistance. Inside the facility, Tark guards scrambled to defend their stronghold. Maya led the ground team, her glowing eyes cutting through the dimly lit corridors. She moved with purpose, her strength and speed unmatched. The Tarks tried to stop her, but their weapons were useless against her. The prisoners, hundreds of them, looked up in disbelief as Mia and her team stormed the holding cells. "You're free now," she said, her voice firm, "but we need your help. Will you fight?" The answer came in the form of a unified roar. Armed with scavenged weapons, the freed prisoners joined the resistance, their fury and determination turning the tide. The facility's destruction sent shockwaves through the Tark Empire. For the first time, they had been defeated by a force they underestimated, a ragtag resistance led by a human girl they had once tortured and left for dead. As the resistance fleet regrouped in deep space, the mood was electric. Ships brimming with freed prisoners joined their ranks, swelling their numbers. The galaxy, once blind to the Tark's reign of terror, began to take notice. Cale and Maya stood together on the bridge, the stars stretching infinitely before them. The tactical display showed their next targets, more facilities, supply lines and strongholds. It was a daunting list, but it was also a testament to how far they had come. "You've started something big," Cale said, his voice low, "bigger than either of us." Mia nodded, her expression resolute. "And we're not stopping until the Tarks are finished." "Finished?" Cale smirked, crossing his arms. "You know, when I took this job, I didn't expect to end up fighting a galactic empire." "And now?" Maya asked, glancing at him. "Now, I wouldn't want to be anywhere else," he said. The two of them watched as the fleet prepared for its next jump. Fighters buzzed around the larger ships, their pilots exchanging signals of camaraderie. The freed prisoners, now soldiers, trained and prepared for the battles ahead. Mia turned to Cale, her glowing eyes soft but determined. "This is just the beginning," she said. "The Tarks took everything from us. Now we take it back." Cale nodded, his expression a mix of pride and resolve. "To the end, Mia, wherever this takes us." The fleet's engines roared to life, the stars bending as the ships disappeared into hyperspace. The galaxy, vast and uncaring, now bore witness to a force it had never seen before. Maya, the girl who had died and risen stronger, led the charge. Her presence was a beacon of hope for the broken and a warning to their oppressors. The resistance was rising, and the galaxy would never be the same.